Go, David. Amazing, thank you. All right. So, welcome to this evening's speech and language webinar, hosted as ever by the Reach Out Early Years Stronger Practice Hub. Tonight, we are thinking about Gestalt language processing, and we are taking a deep dive into stage one. So, I will go through the stages. There are 6 stages of Gestalt language processing. And I will talk briefly about those later. But tonight we're deep diving into stage one. And then over the coming months, we're going to do stage two, stage three, and then we're going to combine stages 4 to 6 in a webinar as well. So these are your webinars for the next few months. So I'm a consultant speech and language therapist at the Cambridge ADHD and Autism Centre, as well as running my own private practice. So this really is a clinical area that I'm super interested in, and I love talking about it. So I hope you enjoy listening to me talking about it tonight. Zoom housekeeping rules. Cameras on or off, I don't mind. It's evening time. It really doesn't matter. It's fine. But please do keep yourself on mute all the time. So that I don't hear any confidential household or setting discussions that I shouldn't hear. At the end of the session, I will throw open the virtual floor for Q&A and you can shout out your questions then. If, like me, you think of something and you know you're going to forget it by the end, please do type it into the chat box as we go. I will come to it at the end. Do come and go as you need. I've got children at home. You may have children at home. If they need you, go. Obviously, they come first, and slides will be emailed to you on receipt of your feedback form. So, your feedback form, we will ask for your email address, and that will kind of unlock the slides. So, if there's anything you don't quite capture tonight, don't panic. You will get the slides later. And also, as I've said before, tonight's recording is going up on YouTube. So again, you can rewatch this back. So these webinars, as I said, are hosted by the Reach Out Early Years Stronger Practice Hub team. And that comprises of Damon, Victoria, Jess and Lisa. And tonight I have got my ever present wingman, Damon, with me online. So thank you for joining. So Stronger Practice Hubs, they support early years settings to improve outcomes in local areas. And this is across the early years foundation stage. It started as initially as part of the COVID-19 early years recovery package, but it's now kind of morphed into something, a bit bigger, because actually the outcomes have been so very good that where we started with 18 Stronger Practice Hubs across the UK, that's doubling from May 26, and the funding has been extended into 2029. So actually, the Stronger Practice Hub sort of approach has been very well received, and it's really exciting to be a part of. Something that you are all obviously welcome to access all the time is the Early Years Evidence Store. This is an online resource brought together by the Education Endowment Foundation, and it covers all aspects of the EYFS. So you can go and have a look at current projects that are happening, current evidence, pilot schemes. There's loads of advice, there's videos, all sorts of bits and bobs that are useful to you, whether you're a new practitioner gaining information for the first time, or whether you are a more experienced practitioner who, like experienced practitioners in any field, are at risk of sort of doing something in the way you've done it because you've always done it that way. And, things change all the time. And tonight's webinar is absolute testament to big things changing in the course of a profession, and in the course of your career. So do go and have a look at that and make sure you're keeping up to date with everything. My favourite sections are obviously communication and language. And if you look down here, you have like an overview. There's a section on vocabulary, language, interactive reading, and there's more. This is just a screen grab. And the other ones that I really like as well, obviously with my sort of neurodiversity hat on, are your personal, social and emotional development. So again, looking at awareness of feelings, modeling how to manage them, thinking about social communication. So do go and have a look. There are other sections. These are obviously just my 2 favorite ones, but it's a really useful resource. So please do go and have a little look. The Stronger Practice Hub can offer bespoke support as well. So we have got some QR codes to follow us on Instagram and join our newsletter and stuff. If you look at that offer, and there's loads, there's webinars on reading, webinars on play, webinars on sustainability, Ofsted frameworks, all sorts of things. But if you think, oh, I could really just do with a hand on managing this particular thing, get in touch and the hub can offer you some bespoke support, all fully funded and free, because we know that childcare isn't just a one size fits all, is it? So different demographics, different settings, different styles, and they will be able to help you. They are so nice. So please do get in touch.
The ingredients to make a mojito.
Right. So of all the people not on mute, that would be one of the members of the actual Stronger Practice Hub. Evening, Lisa. So tonight's webinar, the reason you're all here, Gestalt Language Processing. Now, please, 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 if you haven't seen my whistle stop introduction webinar to Gestalt Language Processing, which we did in October last year, please go and find it here on YouTube, because this will take you through the basics of Gestalt Language Processing. Because we're starting on stage one tonight, I think you'll be okay for tonight. But really, if you can go and have a look at the overview, that will help you kind of see the kind of journey that we're going to go on. So please do try and find this webinar online for me and have a little watch. It will help things make a bit more sense. A lot of the things that I've done tonight are taken from this book, Gestalt Language Processing by Alison Batty, who's a speech and language therapist in the UK. This book it's big, but it's not awfully hard to read. If you can see, there's lots of sort of like there's lots of pages that are tables. And if you're anything like me, you prefer a page that's like a table than a big, huge chunk of text. So actually, it's a big book, but it's really accessible. Lots of bullet points. I do prefer bullet points to paragraphs. So this is quite an easy, accessible read, and this will tell you all you need to know. This it's super practical. I really like this book. So please do head over to Amazon if you want it. I think it's about £35. But there are lots of books that sort of claim to talk a lot about Gestalt language processing, but I trust this one. So please do, if you're going to get anything, get this one. I read an article the other day and it blew my mind. It really, really did. I read the whole article, and that's most unlike me. I tend to prefer a good summary and conclusions section, but I read the whole thing, and it's called The Script Is Not the Silence, Auto Theory of a GLP Mind in a Pathologized World. Okay, so essentially, Dr. Jamie Hurwitz is a Gestalt language processor. And he speaks so eloquently about what it means to be a Gestalt language processor. And this really resonated with me. So we, autistic people who learn language through Gestalt language processing, we're not hard to reach. You're just not listening in our key. And that to me resonated really hard. And I just wanted to throw that out there to you. And this is a long passage, but actually, I think it really, really helps to set the scene about what it is to be a Gestalt language processor. So it begins the same way each time, not with a thought, but with the hum. The shape of a line I once heard years ago, pressed into the grooves of my chest like a record waiting for a needle. I don't summon it, it arrives, whole, intact, bearing the weight of past moments in the cadence of now. I won't read the whole thing, but I thought this second paragraph was quite meaningful. There was a time I thought this made me broken. The speech therapist said so in gentle voices. The educational reports framed it as a delay. Everyone searching for the pieces as if words were beads on a string and I had failed to thread them in order. But I was never missing the meaning. I was holding all of it at once. Not part, but whole. I speak in wholes. I remember in wholes. My story lives in fragments that were never fragments to me. And I think that's really, really key. Not parts, but whole. Okay. And I just think This is so powerful. So please, when you get your slides, go and read this. And if you can find the article, please go and read that. So Gestalt language processing is a type of language processing style. And I want to think about the difference between Gestalt language processing and natural language acquisition, because sometimes there's a bit of confusion about what these two things mean. So Gestalt language processors learn language in chunks or whole phrases rather than individual words. Okay, so these chunks are often called gestalts. Okay, and over time, Gestalt language learners will break the chunks down into smaller parts and recombine them. Now, not all autistic people are Gestalt language processors, and not all Gestalt language processors are autistic, but most of them are. Okay, the vast majority of Gestalt language processors will receive an autism diagnosis. So essentially, Gestalt language processing is the style of language learning. Okay, it's this deconstructing chunks rather than putting chunks together to make putting words together to make a big long sentence. So whereas a traditional analytic language processor will go bus, red bus gone, where red bus gone, where's the red bus gone, and build a sentence up from one word. A Gestalt language processor will take the sentence or the phrase and then break it back down. This, I promise, will all become clear if you've got no experience of Gestalt language processing and you're thinking, what? It will all make sense, I promise. So what's natural language acquisition then? So natural language acquisition is the framework or the model that explains how this language develops over time. Okay. Now it was developed or popularized by Marge Blanc, who is an American speech language pathologist, which is the American name for speech language therapist. And it outlines the specific stages that GLPs typically move through. Okay, and this is what we're going to look at over the next few webinars. So basically, this is the developmental roadmap for people who are Gestalt language processors. So Gestalt language processing is the style of language acquisition, and NLA is kind of that roadmap for how we get there. This is a really nice little visual, really, of how a Gestalt language processor will take something like the wheels on the bus go round and round and maybe change it into let's go on the bus and then get down to like a single word bus that they'll put with other words to make a sentence. Or just like I've said, you might get bus, bus go, yellow bus go for an analytic processor. So the 6 stages of natural language acquisition are whole gestalts, mitigations, isolated single words, original phrases, original sentences, and then grammar. And tonight we're going to have a little look at stage 1, which is whole gestalts. These gestalts are often or sort of interchangeably known as echolalia. So this is where if you have a child who is echolalic, they are repeating chunks, they're repeating phrases, they're singing songs. It might be something off YouTube, it might be a whole Julia Donaldson book, it might be a phrase that they enjoy, it might be a little sound from a toy that they're enjoying mimicking, anything. And these utterances can either be immediate, so you might say, would you like a drink? And they go, would you like a drink? So that immediate echolalia, that immediate copy, or it might be delayed. So these are things that are repeated after a significant delay. And this is where you get the whole repeating of a movie, repeating of a book, repeating of a Hey Dougie episode. So scripting is this delayed echolalia. So it's when people repeat memorized words or groups of words. Now, the thing we need to know with these children is that they are always tied to an emotional experience, okay, from when the words were said. And my favorite example, and people who have been on my webinars before may well be very bored of this, but it's the one that works the best. So I worked with a little lad who came into my clinic room. He was sort of 3, 4 years old. He was a Gestalt language processor, and it was the first time with me, so sort of new environment, new person, and he was getting quite dysregulated and he wanted to go upstairs and he kept asking. I was like, oh, I haven't risk assessed this, so my clinic is my home, and I know my husband's working in the office upstairs in this room, and I was like, oh, but I took him upstairs and took him back down again, and he came back into the therapy room and he went, oh, 5 and 5 is 10. And I went, mm-hmm, okay. And his mum, who was already quite tuned into this, said, oh, yeah, that's from an episode of Number Blocks. And the whole episode was where they couldn't find two numbers that equated to 10. And then they did, and the problem was solved. So basically, this was this little lad's gestalt or script for I had a problem, but now it's all better. Okay, because in Number Blocks they had a problem, but they had solved it and it was all better. So his script for, oh, that's all right now, that was really bothering me, but I'm all right now, was and 5 is 10. Now, to the untrained ear, you might think, oh, what a meaningless phrase. But if we can become detectives and work out what the emotional tie to that gestalt or that phrase is, then we're going to start winning. So gestalts are a soundtrack that has accompanied a memorable experience. Okay. And as this picture says, echolalia is not just a parrot-like repetition, it's a window into the emotional states of GLPs. So GLPs look at the whole experience. And a gestalt will be produced with the same intonation, the same volume, the same rate, the same accent, the same voice quality as the time they made the connection to that experience. Okay, it's going to be done the same way each time. So gestalts can be as long as a whole movie or as short as a single word. I jumped the gun a little bit talking about my little man with 5 and 5 is 10. I just get so excited to tell the story, but that's an example. I had another little lad that I worked with that had two gestalts for I am not okay. Okay. And I had to really be listening out for them. And once I'd worked, it took me ages to work out what they were. But once I cottoned on, we were able to reduce a lot of frustration. So one of them was shut the door. So if he said, shut the door, shut the door, shut the door, he didn't actually want me to shut the door. Something had happened, presumably, that had made him feel uncomfortable and he wanted the door shut. And his phrase for I'm not okay was shut the door. The other one, confusingly, was I'm all right. So if I would say, let's blow bubbles, and he'd go, I'm all right, I'm all right, I'm all right. Or I might say, let's go down the corridor because we used to work in a school. Let's go down the corridor. I'm all right. Meant, no, thank you. I don't want to do that. So you've got to really become a detective because actually the words that the child is saying might actually like give you a completely different meaning to what they're actually trying to tell you. So you've got to be detectives. The other thing that we see in echolalia is like a jargon where children will repeat sounds, words, or phrases that are usually very, very rich in intonation, but they're not able to be understood by adults. So it can sometimes be vocal play in a more typically developing child or sort of a more analytic language developing. But sometimes it can be some scripting. And I've actually got a video of a little lady who is doing just that here. You'll hear the odd intelligible word, but largely around it, there is an awful lot of jargon. So have a little listen to this little girl and see what you think.
Whoa. You won't. Did you? Really? Was it good? Did you swimming like this? Did they splash? Did you splash the water? No. Wow, good. Did you splash Daddy with the water? Daddy, what? Daddy, what? Did she? Yeah. Oh, that's good. So, Daddy got very wet, did he? Okay. Okay.
So you could hear there, couldn't you, that she was having the most beautiful conversation. It felt so rich in everything other than words we could understand. Okay. And actually, this little lady, I work with her now, and she did receive a diagnosis of autism. And if you go and watch the Gestalt Language Processing webinar that I pointed you towards at the start, actually you will see her 2 years on speaking in the most wonderful sort of novel language. So she's doing exceptionally well. You may also see these children sort of just speak in a way that doesn't sound like a child might usually speak. So they might say something sort of very sort of scripted, like "fancy seeing you here," or "kids these days, am I right?" Or generally speaking, I don't think that's true. So there is a little Gestalt language processor in my daughter's school. I don't see him, but he very much enjoys seeing me, and he calls me Mrs. Frewin. And the other day he said to me, "Ah, Mrs. Frewin, it's wonderful to see you. I haven't seen you since the last time I saw you." And it was just delightful, but he just doesn't sound like a kid. And it's that kind of style that you might see with these Gestalt language processors. It's also important to know that Gestalts can be spoken or they can be non-speech. So they could be a sign or a gesture or a point or a mime, or they can be a mixture. Okay, they can be multimodal. So they can be a bit of speaking, a bit of sign, a bit of a point, bit of a gesture. What your key is if it's the same every time, it is a Gestalt. Okay, so don't think that if it's like a sign or a couple of signs and a point in a particular order, oh, it can't be a Gestalt because it's not spoken. These can happen in any way at all. So what do we do? I think that stage one can sometimes feel, as a practitioner, the most scary, intimidating stage, because actually you've got a child who is talking at you as if they are making the most sense in the world, and you're like, I've got no idea. And that can sometimes feel really quite scary when you're the grown up and you're meant to have all the answers. So, having a few tips and tricks on how to approach a stage one Gestalt language processor can be really, really helpful. So, I think the first thing to do is not to panic. I think some of us can kind of do that and just go, oh, and just kind of really pull away, not in a horrible way, but in a I don't know what I'm doing kind of way. The most important thing you can do is work on establishing trust and connection. These gorgeous children are very used to people just not getting them and just sort of going, and just, walking away or doing the wrong thing. It becomes the Gestalt language processor's norm, and that's really, really sad. These children are also often, but not always, but often the kind of children who are lining things up, watching things spin, down on the floor, rolling cars back and forward. And we need to show them that this play is actually valued rather than trying to move them onto something that we think is a bit more traditional play. Please don't try and persuade them to do something that they don't want to do. It's really important with these children to follow their lead 100%. Okay. Allow the child to meet their sensory and movement needs where it is safe to do so. And actually only join if they're happy for you to do so. Because again, if you're kind of sort of muscling in on their space, their activity, and they don't want you there, actually you're not playing the long game. And I think that's what we need to be doing with these children, is playing the long game, thinking, okay, well, today they weren't up for me being with them, but actually I can do more damage to this relationship if I keep on pushing. So step back. Always acknowledge a Gestalt. even if you don't know what it means, okay? Say yeah, agree, smile, nod, repeat it back. If you don't understand what they said, repeat what you can, just give a more generic answer. So the granddad on the video we just saw was excellent in the way he's going, oh, did you? Did you splash? Did you go swimming? Did daddy get wet? Lovely. He didn't really know what the little girl was saying, but he was carrying on the conversation and validating her beautifully. Never try to stop echolalia, okay? It's communicating something, even if we don't know what. So again, I talk about the history of Gestalt language processing in my last webinar, but we spent many, many, many years thinking that echolalia was meaningless and it didn't communicate anything. And we used to just sort of try and turn it off from children and get them to speak in words like more or up or again. We now know that they're communicating something to us. So let's not stop it, because you wouldn't stop another child from talking. So even if you're not sure what they mean, just let them get it out. As we've said before, become a detective. So remember, it might be out of context for us, but it's going to be 100% in context for the child. That child will have connected that gestalt with a feeling acquired during a highly emotional experience. It means something to them. Okay, so we need to think, right, okay, I know that's from an episode of Paw Patrol. I'm going to go back and have a look at the episode of Paw Patrol. What was happening at that point in the episode? Was there a problem? Was there something amazing happening? Was somebody feeling confused? Was somebody feeling angry? What was happening in that episode that we can infer the child might be trying to communicate to us? Okay, it does take a bit of detective work. And also, this is where parents can be your friends, particularly if they understand Gestalt language processing. Please, 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 please stop asking questions. Okay, if you say to a child when you're offering them a drink, do you want a drink? The child will pick up, do you want a drink, as their Gestalt for I'm thirsty. Okay, they're going to connect the sense of, oh, brilliant, I was thirsty and I got a drink, to do you want a drink? And actually, I'm working with sort of, I think he's a 9-year-old at the moment, who is a Gestalt language processor, but we did not know that when we first started work. I've started working with him when he was 2. And actually, Gestalt language processing hadn't really surfaced at that point. So we didn't really know about it. And actually, he now speaks mostly in questions. So when he's picking out a felt tip pen, for example, when he's colouring, instead of going, I'm going to choose the blue one, he goes, which one shall we choose now? Because he's obviously had years of adults going, which one shall we choose now? Rather than, let's choose the blue one, let's choose the pink one, I want the blue one. Okay. So what I've got now is a child who all of his statements are phrased as questions, because he's mimicking what all of his adult caregivers have given him over the years. So we practiced something called declarative language. So statements, basically. So here's a drink, I'm thirsty. Okay. Talk naturally at least 50% of the time. Okay, so I think the clue for the roadmap is in the name, natural language acquisition. It's all about natural language. Okay, so by all means do some intentional modeling about half the time, but the rest just chat naturally. And again, it can feel quite counterintuitive when every speech and language therapist you've ever met before has probably said, make your language simple, talk to children in one word only. But if we talk to children who deconstruct to get their novel language, and I give them just one word at a time, where can they go with one word at a time? Nowhere. Okay, so you have to flip it on your head and talk to children in phrases, and that can feel really, really scary. And it feels scary for me sometimes as well, because it's everything I've ever practiced, being flipped on its head, but it works. The other thing to say is don't be scared of silence. Make use of the silence. Okay. I think some of us feel that we should be talking and pumping language in all the time. We need to allow time for processing. We need to allow time for the child to experiment with their spoken language. I think particularly for me, when I have a parent sitting in the room while I do therapy with their child, and obviously they're paying me, I feel very much like I should be talking the whole time because that's what they're paying me for. And you have to become brave to sit with silence, because actually children need that silence to be able to process and think, and to be able to have that opportunity to use the language that they have. I've jumped the gun again, but yes, single words can't be expanded or added to. If there is a child who's at stage 1 of natural language acquisition and they are saying a single word, that word is a whole gestalt. So, for example, I have a little boy at the moment who has a gestalt achoo, and that's my fault because I often use inset puzzles, wooden inset puzzles in therapy, and I sneeze the pieces out for comic effect. I go ha 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 chew, and then they all end up on the floor. So this is my little lad's. He finds it utterly hilarious, and I visit him in nursery, and the nursery staff said to me, he just keeps saying achoo, and we don't know why. And I said, is it usually when something funny has happened? And they were like, do you know what? Yeah, it is. And I said, oh, that's my fault. That achoo gestalt is, that was really funny and I'd love you to do it again. Okay. So a single word for children who are clearly echolalic is a gestalt, and you can't build on it. It's going to be just that one word. Okay, so a traditional language learner will take a word, as I said, add a word, add a word, add a word, add a word. It doesn't work like that for your Gestalt language processors. Rich intonation, please, if you're talking to a Gestalt language processor. GLPs are musical learners. They are super sensitive to intonation, pitch, and rhythm. And there has been some research that has shown that GLPs are more likely to take up and absorb phrases when they're modelled with the intervals of an octave. So like somewhere over the rainbow. So that somewhere is an octave. A fifth, so twinkle, twinkle. If you speak in a phrase like that, they might take that on a bit more. Or a fourth, so here comes that one. So if you go time to wash your hands, again, that's an octave, that's an interval where they might just take that on board a little bit more. So for those of you who are musically minded, they're your key 3 intervals. But for those of you who aren't, just keep it rich in intonation. The more sing-song you can be, the better for the Gestalt language processors. I wanted to finish with a sort of tale about happy birthday, because this blew my mind and I only discovered this about a fortnight ago. So I do work with a little Gestalt language processor who is utterly terrified when he's in a restaurant or at a birthday party and people start to sing happy birthday. He absolutely wails. He's terrified. It's awful. The parents have to quickly remove him from wherever they are. And they said, Becky, we just don't understand why that is. And I said, no, nor do I. Then I discovered this on Instagram the other day. So why do so many hyperlexic kids have an intense fear of the happy birthday song? Think about what happens when a group of people start to sing happy birthday. Not everyone sings in sync or in tune. There might be different pitches, different volumes, different speeds. It sounds messy, doesn't it, when a group of people sing happy birthday? We know that. You've got your singers, your non-singers, those who are in key, those who are singing it funny for comic effect. There's all sorts of variations. Keeping in mind that those hyperlexic children are all often Gestalt language or cognitive processors. So for these children, that song's entire event is stored as a chunk in their memory. Any change from that chunk will feel like a broken pattern. So if they've stored happy birthday, their joyful happy birthday, in one form, any other form of happy birthday will clash with that and sound awful and be potentially very upsetting. So they're also drawn to the intonation, the pitch, and the rhythm of music. And we know when a group sings happy birthday, that gets chaotic, doesn't it? It is a mess. We need to consider that also many of these Gestalt language processors and hyperlexic kids have perfect pitch. So also it can be something very much simpler. It can just be if happy birthday is in the wrong key or a different key to that stored Gestalt, it's going to sound wrong. And how often does the birthday sing along ever follow the exact same pattern each time? Probably never, unless you're playing it off of a pre-recorded version. There's also other sensory elements to consider, like lighting changes, the smell of the candle flames, all of that. So it's well worth thinking in your setting. If you've got a child who freaks out every time happy birthday is sung, could there be some kind of link there? That is just really interesting to me to think about, how purist these children are in terms of how they've stored those gestalts and how upsetting it can be if a gestalt is changed ever so slightly. So I think it's just worth bearing in mind. So what comes next? So next is stage 2, which is mitigating gestalt. So this is known as the mix and match stage. This is where things start to get a bit interesting. This is where children start to take a bit of one chunk, a bit of another chunk, and combine them to make a new novel chunk, okay? And this, I think, is where we can start to have some effect with the language that we use. So I think stage 1 is very much about getting that connection, being a detective, learning to listen, learning to communicate, learning to validate that child's communication in whatever form it is, whether we understand it or not. Stage 2, excuse me, is where we're starting to see things happen. And we're starting to see those gestalts mix and mold into something new, and we can have a bit of effect on that. If you want to find out more about neurodiversity and Gestalt language processing, I would advise you to go and check out these Instagram accounts, particularly for Gestalt language processing, these bottom 2, although the other 4 are all fascinating accounts that you will learn a lot from. So, but particularly these bottom 2 for Gestalt language processing. Coming up next week, we have got my ADHD in early years webinar. I think that's possibly our best ever attended webinar from memory. So we thought it was time to bring it back for a repeat. So for those of you who don't know, both of my daughters are diagnosed with ADHD. So I work it and live it. And then, so I think I find it another fascinating subject. And then you can join me again on the 6th or the 12th of May to see Gestalt Language Processing Stage 2. So try and join me for those if you can.